Father, this morning we are excited to see images and videos from Israel and the surrounding area, and to see some of the sites that we read about in your holy word. Father, may we this morning, as we listen to Michelle and Wes and think about the things that they share, may we be challenged to hold fast to your word and to understand the truth that's in it. May we work hard to proclaim that truth of the gospel to others that are around us. Father, I'm so thankful for this body and the time that we have together each Sunday. May you help us to never take this for granted. Father, we love you. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Michelle and Wes to share with us this morning.
Thanks. Well, it's a real privilege to be able to share with you guys our trip. You know, we were incredibly blessed to be able to go. This is the first time that Cedarville University had ever done anything like this with one of our sports teams. And so as we prayed about, you know, what our role was going to be and should we go on this trip, what would it be like, you know, we had four real clear purposes that came up very evident on why we should go and what would be our role in the trip for Michelle and I to do this with the men's team. First of all, athletic training services is what I do with the men's team all the time. I do sports medicine with them, so I take care of their injuries. I do rehab with them. I prepare them to play at the best of their abilities. So going on this trip, part of that role was understanding that this was not just going to be a basketball trip. We were going to do an entire biblical tour on top of doing a basketball trip with our men. So I had a very unique opportunity to try to serve with them in that capacity. The next piece was a discipleship piece. We understand that at Cedarville, for all of our students, but also our teams, discipleship and helping them grow to have a platform to share the word is really important. And so, you know, Coach understood that trying to do this with these guys in this setting was going to be a lot. So he asked me to come along with them and try to help them understand what they're learning, walk through some of the scripture passages, and really build their faith to have a platform. And of course, the other side of that is we got to learn an unbelievable amount ourselves and be tremendously blessed by that process. And then, of course, we had an intentional plan to actually share Christ through basketball. And I think everybody received our prayer letter, but we shared how over there's a challenge of actually using words sometimes because they know, a lot of the people there know the Bible so much better than we do. They live it, they walk it, they're around it, their cultures and history. You know, we have American history. They really have biblical history as their history. So they don't always want you to sit there and share straightforward. What they want you to do is live a life that's consistent with what Christ has taught them and give an example through who you are, behave differently, let your testimony really be played out. And then if they sit there and they believe you because of who you are, they may listen to what you have to say to them as far as when it comes to Scripture and how Christ has changed your life. And so Coach had a very intentional, and we'll share that a little bit more in a bit, way that we were going to actually interact with our players with the Palestinian teams that we played. And then last was just our couple growing together and sharing our ministry together. Mm-hmm.
We just really wanted to thank everybody for supporting us going. We felt very just encouraged to have the experience together, and that was really important. We're so grateful for you guys. That being said, please, as we go along, if you think of something you want to ask us, it helps us to remember what we did, and if anything is important to you that you would, that God showed us that we could share with you, we'd love to do that. So save some questions for the end because we would love to dive in a little deeper. There's a lot that we didn't get to put in. So.
Yeah, we started this off, I think it was like 24 hours when we started, and we had to pare it down to 35 minutes. And so we're actually not even going to hit all the highlights, but we're going to try to share an intentional story that shares how this impacted us a little bit. So there's so much more to it. We'd love to have more questions on here. So let's see if this thing works. I'm not getting the advance. Howard, I'm not getting an advance here with the... I know it's on. I can do my green light over here, but... Well, we'll keep talking a little bit on here. So one of the big things that we had, and we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to keep moving through slides. Oh, there we go. So our first impressions when we got there, we didn't really know what to expect. I mean, obviously, going to Israel was a bucket list place I'd want to go my whole life. I never knew if I'd have the chance to go. And but then I realized as we prepared to go on this trip, how little I actually understood and knew about the place where the Bible had happened. And so we get off the plane, and it was a whirlwind tour. But we hop on the bus, and we start driving down to our first destination, and really quickly we realized it is different than the U.S. We are a tiny little newborn baby country compared to Israel, where history is everywhere, and archaeology is everywhere, and the timelines are just so different from anything that we can even fathom in America because of where our country started. And so we're looking out the window, and our guide John is just like, over here, this is where David fought Goliath, and over here, this is where Jesus walked and where he was born, and over here is an archaeological a temple that's Herod's palace, and it's a tiny little country, but there's so much there. And when you think about how big Israel is, it's only half the size of Ohio. It's the size of New Jersey. But if you go from Toledo to Cincinnati, and then only from pretty much us over to the Indiana border, that's as big as Israel is. It's a small place. So you think of all the stories that you read in the Bible, it's condensed into this little area. And so it's just your head's on a swivel, getting some neck injuries as you're trying to see all the things going by. It was pretty neat. But the second thing is geography really matters. And this is something that was so encouraging to us. There were a few major things. Geography matters. Understanding the culture is huge. And then understanding the word pictures that are used by how the culture actually sees things totally changed the way that we read Scripture and made it so much fun. I mean, literally, we've been diving into the Word, and every story that we've read before is just so fascinating because we understand it better, because we have a better ability to look at these places and now have the picture. You guys have all read a book, right? And you've read the book, and then afterwards you watch the movie, and you kind of compare how the book looks compared to the movie. Now, this is different because this is the real thing. Sometimes the book is always better than the movie, but in this case, when you can see the real places, it totally changes how you see, because we all have our own perspective. When I read something, when you read something, when Michelle reads something, we all picture it through our experiences on what it looks like, and we have these ideas. But once you get there, you see it for real. And a lot of things are very, very different than what I had pictured in my mind, just reading things all the time. First of all, the terrain was unbelievably rugged. I mean, I knew it was going to be rugged. I'm an outdoors guy. I love hiking. That's what I love doing. So I was like, this is going to be pretty cool. When I got there, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. This is a rugged country. It's out west. It's kind of like if you've been to Arizona or some of those places like that, it's kind of like that. But it is just incredibly deep gullies and riverbeds with these ridges and plateaus, and there's not a flat spot through most of Israel. It's up and down, and we'd have a planned trip, and I'd look on my GPS when we had Wi-Fi in the hotel. It'd be a couple miles away, and then when we went to drive there, it would take us a couple hours to get there because it just zigzagging back and forth to try to reach that spot. But on top of that, just significantly, the way the country's set up is really unique. So they have the area along the Mediterranean is called the Levant, and it's real flat in a plateau. And as you move into the hilly areas of Israel, it's significant. This is where Jerusalem is and where most of the Israelites lived most of the time. What's significant about that is all the moisture off the Mediterranean Sea comes in, hits those mountains, the clouds raise, they dump all their water, and all the rain gets rained out, and then it crosses over the mountains, and in the space of about 2 to 3 miles inwards, the rain stopped and there's no water, and it's just desert. So you actually get to the space where in Jerusalem, they get as much rain in Jerusalem as London does. And you think of as London as being rainy all the time, and smog and dark clouds, and because it's raining and wet, and that's the way it is. But they get all that rain in 3 months in the Jerusalem area. But then as you go 3-4 miles in, they get totally arid desert, so there's nothing there. So these places that we talk about, the desert and this other area, are very close together, so it makes it really quick. And that was just neat to see how, when Jesus wandered out, when he went into the wilderness, or people would go into the wilderness to pray or to run away from people pursuing them, we think of them running clear out to out west to try to get away from them. So this is this huge long trek. They're going 5 miles, and then they're hard to find and hard to catch. And so they really was a place they could escape to or get away from everybody else. So And then, of course, the last thing is where God intentionally placed Israel is so significant. I'd read the Bible. I knew my whole life that Israel was a land bridge, right? It's a place where everybody had to go. But I didn't really understand why it was so much that way, because when you look at I'll pull this up here. When you look at this kind of Arab peninsula, you see this big landmass, so why does everybody have to go through Israel? So why is this really a land bridge? But then when you get there and you see that impassable desert right there, there's no way people can go across that, especially back then. They didn't have cars and modern conveniences or airplanes to fly over it. They had to hike. And so the only way to link the three major areas of civilization in Europe, Asia, and Egypt was to go directly through Israel. And of course, John kept telling us how this was a very intentional plan that God had. If he was going to try to impact the world and have Jesus come and become the Savior of the world, it had to happen in a place that everybody could hear about him. So instead of having missionaries go out as they did, at that time, everybody was coming to them. If you wanted to trade with any group, if you wanted to conquer any group, if you wanted to do any of these things, you were passing through Israel to make these things happen, and very intentionally. So he had obviously, over and over, we just learned God has a really intentional plan, and he does things for a purpose, and it's not something he just put together. It's something he's known forever. So the next thing we'd understand hospitality. We read so many stories where Jesus tells you to love your neighbor as yourself and to do these different things. As we start to see culturally how important hospitality was to not just the Israelites, but also to the Palestinians when we came there. It was, you walked in, you felt like a celebrity everywhere we went. We were a little like, we're guests, we're tourists, so they're going to be mean to us. We kind of heard about unrest in Israel. We got there and everybody treated us like we were the best thing that ever happened. And then our guy starts telling us that that's the way the culture is. It's such an honor for somebody in both those cultures to have a guest into their home. And he shared that you guys are safe. And he would be fine. We're just walking around the West Bank and no problem. He's like, you guys are safe. Crime doesn't happen against visitors here. Over there, family honor is so important to them culturally that they won't go and hurt somebody or steal from somebody in the space, because if that were to get caught, it would be such a black eye on their family that it's just something they just don't do. Crime and stuff like that happens inside the family structure to each other, unfortunately. So it's a very internalized culture when they do those things. So it was something to think about how it's just different from how we view things a lot of times. I think so many times here we're so much protect the family, and it's so external. Over there it was so internal in how they did things. And lastly, together but separate. Obviously we've been praying for the war over there tremendously, obviously, to be there so soon before that happened. But it was so clear to us how this is just a powder keg. I mean, how this doesn't go on all the time was amazing, because we'd be walking we'd be driving between different places, and we spent a lot of time in the West Bank because we played most of our basketball games against Palestinian teams. And we were in Bethlehem for 5 days, and we were driving in and out of the West Bank to go to different places. And every time we would leave the West Bank, we'd have to go through a military checkpoint. They'd stop our bus. A couple of guys with Uzis would walk onto our bus and walk up and down the rows. They'd just pick 2 people out. We'd have to go off the bus, and they'd take them to the opposite sides of the bus and have a conversation with them to see if their stories lined up to where we were going and what we were doing. They'd get back on the bus, and John was always like, just be polite. Don't say anything about we're just here. Don't say anything about a basketball tour. He's like, we're just here doing a biblical tour. That's all we're doing. Because the Israelites would have been super excited about us playing a lot of Palestinian teams while we were there. And so just that pressure. But then we also had to do as we're driving down the road, John would just point out there'd be this nice community. And this is going to be a lot of different things from what my experience was. There'd be this really nice community, these nice red roofs. It'd look all green on this side of the road. And we'll call this town Tiberias, just out of it to pick a town. Then on this side of the road over here would be this pretty run-down, dry, barren-looking town. They'd be right across the street from each other. I'm like, wow, how are those two communities different? Because this was an Israeli community over here, and this was a Palestinian community over here. And the affluence and the monetary differences between those two communities were really huge. The Israeli community would be circled by 8-foot fences and barbed wire and have guards in it. And the Palestinian community would be wide open, ready to go. So it's just very different than just seeing those things happen. So, anything else I missed on that? That was a lot. So I'm going to have to share about John.
So the guide that took us for all of the biblical touring was John Farewell. He works with Athletes in Action. He's a basketball coach who worked for some D1 schools here in the States, and then he got really interested in the Bible and pursued a degree in biblical history and archaeology in Jerusalem. And he was so passionate about the Bible, and really, obviously, with his experience working with other teams, he was great with meeting the guys where they were and being able to almost coach them in their biblical walks. So he was very knowledgeable, had a lot of experience with the guys. Each day was jam-packed, like Wes was talking about. We had early mornings, very long hikes. It was hot. We would play basketball, not every day, but after hiking a long time, we had played enough that it was very tiring for the guys. Long sermons, van rides. So each day was filled from the moment we got up till when we went to bed. We didn't even have time to think. I didn't think.
Yeah, he would always joke, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. He's like, once you get back, you'll digest it all and you'll start working through it. And that's the way it's been. We still have years to digest everything that we learned over that time. But he broke our trip up into very specific pieces. Our first 4 days was down in the wilderness. So we went down to the southern part of Israel. And that was important. He wanted to pull us out of kind of our Western culture and plop us into this really arid, dry, isolated space and go from Exodus, just like the Israelites did, and move all the way through until Jesus' death and resurrection so we could kind of experience that story. So then we spent day 4 to 7 in the West Bank. Then we moved up to the Galilee, which was where Jesus spent 80% of his ministry. And the Galilee was just such a different place compared to almost anywhere else we'd been because it was beautiful. It looks like a resort area up around the lake. It's so pretty. And then we went to Old City, Jerusalem, and we actually had a hotel inside the walls and spent a lot of time walking around there. And that was amazing. You can see the picture up there. There's Michelle standing in front of one of the temple stones that was building the temple. Those are the largest stones of any construction in the world right there. And so those are one of the stones that Herod put in place. And they go all around the entire summit of the Temple Mount right there. Pretty neat. Bigger than the pyramid stones, just pretty neat. So this is where our trips kind of started in the wilderness. And I'm going to show you a little bit where we were right here. So we flew into Tel Aviv, and then we drove all the way down here to Mitzpah Ramon. And then we spent this whole section of the slides are going to be all down in this area right here, okay? And we got up to Beersheba a little bit as well, but we're spending down here in the desert. And this is actually where the Israelites spent, they had their first 40 years, and then they sinned, and then they spent another 40 years wandering around. So they started off coming across for their first 40 years out of Egypt and up into here, and then that second 40 years they kind of milled around this space, and they were there for a long time. And so there's a lot of history that went in there. But John talked to us about how the deserts are very different over there. There's different types of desert and different levels of difficulty in living. So he has the Midbar Desert, which is a place that if you were to land in the Midbar Desert, you could survive. There's enough water, there's some places to go, you'd be okay. He said in the Yeshimon Desert, this is where if you are there by yourself, you're a goner, but if somebody's there to help you, you can live and survive. And then you have the Sar Desert, which is impossible to live. If you guys are there, even with help, you're done. And how most of the desert that you walk through is either Yeshimon or Sar. It's unlivable, impossible to survive in. But in the Bible describes that time as the Israelites wandered as all Midbar. So why would the Bible describe this area as Midbar, even though it's definitely Sar or Yeshimon? And the answer would be because the Lord was with them, right? And so they called it Midbar because God was providing for them. He was giving them manna and quail and water and direction with a pillar of fire. And so John referred to this whole time as the honeymoon phase, because the Israelites had been in Egypt for 400 years, and he was really they had had stories and had been talked about, but God wasn't really that real to them at the point when they were coming out of Egypt, because had been Abraham who had been really experienced and been quiet for a long time. So this was the space where God was pulling them to this desolate wasteland where they had to depend on him. They had to know him and get to see who he was. And so he said, this is your honeymoon. I'm not sure it's the type of honeymoon that I would take Michelle on, but it was a honeymoon where the Israelites moved away from the Egyptian culture and became who they were in God's people during that time. So then I'll kind of move through some of these ones quicker here, but So we went to Wadi's Inn, and Wadi's Inn was probably my favorite hike. It was beautiful. There's a big springs that come through there. But this is where Moses struck the rock and sinned against God and lost his opportunity to go into the promised land. And so this was a space where John looked at all the guys and challenged them to have obedience and to trust God's plan, because Moses makes this mistake. And if we had more time, I could share so much more into the story on why this was a bigger mistake than what I had ever thought of when I did this, when he struck the rock versus obedience. But how significant it is, and God wants us to trust him and follow him, and he has it figured out. We don't need to do it under our own power. So that was really, really neat. Then we came over here to the Dead Sea.
Hey, Wes.
Yeah.
Back up there, when the Israelites were coming through, the land was really similar to where Moses saw the burning bush.
Yeah.
And John had us take our shoes off. And I mean, it was hot. It was only like 8 a.m, and it was already so hot. He said, okay, everybody take your shoes off. And we're standing on this ground that was not sand anywhere. It was such sharp rock.
Yeah, I'll show you. I think I have that's a zoomed in picture right there. So this is this top picture up in here. We zoomed in on the ground, and it's all just rocks. It's not sand. We think of sandy deserts. This is all rocks, no sand at all. Sorry. So and he explained in here when Moses had the burning bush, this is the type of desert he was in. And so, of course, we know what did Moses do when he came to the burning bush? He took his shoes off because it was holy ground. And he gave us a lesson here that said, and we took our shoes off and we stood there, and everybody's just like, oh, it hurts. It's so uncomfortable. And we're standing there trying to get comfortable. And then as soon as we got there, we're like standing still. And he's like, you guys don't want to move, do you? And we're like, absolutely not. And he's like, this is part of how God works, right? If you're going to take your shoes off and you stand there and this burning bush is going, and realize that Moses thinks he's probably going to die, right? Because if you see God, then you die. But it's a commitment of being all in, because you can't run away. I mean, if you run away, you're taking 2 or 3 steps and you're done. Your feet are toast going out on here. So it was a real picture of when God commissions you and you feel the call, you got to be all in, because that's what God expects and demands of you when you're doing these things. And so it was a really neat lesson, and that we won't forget. I mean, I think it took us a while to recover after standing on there just for a few minutes. But thanks. So we'll see. This is the Dead Sea. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. We got to see where they were all hidden. That's the library where a lot of them were written in. This was a picture that we took from standing in the actual space where they would have been written. So it was really neat. And then down here in the copper mines, this was down in Solomon's copper mines right here, where there's still copper mines going on today. And so a lot of that wealth that was only occupied by the Israelites during Solomon's time. And there's a really neat lesson that he shared in here about how copper is made. They would grind up these rocks and boil the rocks in these cauldrons, and then all the copper is heavier, so it settles, and all the impurities from the rocks come to the top of the cauldrons. And what they would do is they would just fill these big scoops and scoop off the impurities and toss them away. And John challenged our guys that if you really want to become pure and have a heart after the Lord, you've got to be refined and then cast the impurities off, just like in our normal Christian walks. And so it was a lesson that really stuck with the expectations. If you want to grow, it takes heat and fire and work, and then it takes a commitment to actually throwing away those things that are throwing you off. And so we got to walk around. We could pick up still little pieces of slag, which is the cast-off pieces that were all littered around the areas from the copper mines. So it really stayed with us. So I'm going to show you guys a little video. Just, we're going to be a little bit formal here, but I want you guys to see, we're walking around with a basketball group of 10 guys, and I think it'd be fun for you guys to see a little bit of what their experiences is going to be as well. So Howard, if you can play that.
And their personality.
Yeah. So.
All right, here we go. Start it off, Chris. What's this? What we looking at?
I don't know. I think the Sickles fam.
Oh, this is a tabernacle.
Animals, baby. A little up in here. A little slide.
That's where they would make sacrifices right there.
Mm-hmm. Just to wash your hands. Bro, show them how they wash their hands, bro.
Wait till I turn like that. So I can't get
Yeah, let's see it. Take the bowl. Yep, scoop. Put it here. Okay. Yeah.
dip this in.
That's good stuff, bro.
Let's look at kind of.
That boy paid attention. Let's get up in here, man. Let's up at the tabernacle. Got some bread to start it off. 12 slices, 12 tribes.
Me.
Got your little, hey, Brian, why is there 7 candles on this thing, man?
It's a number that means wholeness.
Wholeness. Just like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hey, he would know it too. That's the high priest, baby. Hey, get up there, we get it in there, bro. Yeah, what the high priest do with this? I actually don't know this part. You gotta explain it. All right, yeah, that's what's up, baby. The holies are on me. Got the colors up here. All right, bruh. What's that stick?
It's the staff of Aaron.
Staff of Aaron.
With flowers. We don't know any words.
What's that?
Oh, that's the man.
Manna, mana,
The tank of men.
and the covenant, baby. Right underneath the angels. It's crazy. It's holy. Only this dude was allowed to walk up in there. The high priest. My boy. All right.
It's not this little sacrifice about to
Why'd you go ahead and skip? Whoops.
stick.
That is
This
sick.
Or on the day Jesus died. Can't tear this. Nobody can
Don't
tear that.
tear it, man. Don't tear it. All right. Hey. Tabernacle, baby.
Sucker.
Yep.
Yeah, we're all set. No. So we had a bunch of characters, but they were bought in. I mean, we would spend hours and I mean, those really John would always we'd walk around and he'd say, grab a 10-minute rock, and we knew that a 10-minute rock that we were going to sit down would be about a half hour to an hour plus, where he'd just share. And the guys stayed engaged the whole time, and this has been great conversations we've had. So I was really impressed with their heart to learn as we went through those different pieces. So next we moved from the southern part of Israel, and we kind of moved now up into the West Bank. So we were right actually here. That's Bethlehem right there. So we were just south of Jerusalem. So we were in Bethlehem staying, and then we would work all through the West Bank and into the Judean wilderness over here for these next couple of slides. So up in the top, this is where Samson's grave is. So those are the guys that are standing up on top of the rock. They're looking out over the Sorek Valley, and that's where Samson would come up here, look down at the wealth, because the Philistine people group was a lot more advanced than the Israelites at this time. And so Samson would look down there and he would see things that he wanted, obviously, including Delilah at that time, and he would wander down that mountain, kill some Philistines, do some things he shouldn't do. And then John used this as a really important learning lesson for our guys, which I thought was one of our more powerful moments. He spoke about guarding your eyes, and how as Samson stood up here on top of this hill and looking down at what he wanted and had the lust of the eyes and different issues, it caused him to walk away from the word and do a lot of things. We look at Samson's life, and for a large part, we think he was kind of a failure. God gave him so much. And so I'm looking at a bunch of basketball guys, right, with incredible talents and an incredible platform. And he's like, God gave Samson so much, but did he really do what he could have done with it? And one of the lessons was, how much more could Samson have done if he was truly bought into what God did, and what squandered that? And that was the lust of his eyes to do different things, and challenging them to guard their eyes, pay attention to what they do, to not lust after the things of this world, but to really be committed to giving their time and their energies to following the Lord, and how impactful they could be if they did that. So that was neat. And he had the guys sit there and just talk about what are the things that we need to cast off. So this is coming off after that trip down at the Solomon's Mines, and being, what are the things we can get rid of? How can we protect ourselves? And that was just a really neat lesson that we shared. From there, we were up here playing the basketball up in the Bethlehem. And so what Coach did is he had our guys all up, and we had 3 different teams we were playing in a tournament. But then he took 2 of our guys and put them on each of the other teams to create some balance. The level of basketball wasn't quite where we were at, so he took our guys and split them out. Which sounds okay, it was neat, but it was very intentional, because remember, we wanted to actually walk the walk and share with them. So how else are we going to be able to get interaction with them unless we could sit there and put these guys on their teams? And very quickly they could realize, because basketball is important to them, they love it. So they could very quickly see how good these guys were, and so they had a platform, and we would send them up there with their teams if they weren't with us. Well, if we were eating, coming back from a trip, and they would be on their own with those teams, and they'd play with them, and then they'd come back, and then we'd go up and play our game against the teams as well. So it gave a real opportunity for them to engage them and become friends. And they all, obviously, nothing bonds guys like sports. And so they connected really quickly, and it was pretty fun. But we would show up, we'd get back off our tour for 6 in the morning, we'd go till 5 at night, we'd hop off. The guys that were going to play the first round of games wouldn't have time to eat, so we'd give them a snack after hiking all day. We'd send them up to play with their teams. Everybody else would eat real quick. Then they'd have to get up there by the time that game was done so they could play their game afterwards. So we'd get there at 5:30, have games by 6, and then we'd have a double stacked games in the evening, and then we'd come back and then do it again. And this was a challenge, and this wore our guys down. And I'll share this as part of my ministry then is dealing with this as the sickness bug and different things hit our team as the guys wore out. But it was an incredible experience, and I think coached it in a way that we really were able to have an influence on the teams there. So down here we were in Nazareth. Of course, that's where Jesus was from, Joseph, where he grew up. And this was one of those kind of aha moments. And I'm just going to say real quick, I'm an athletic trainer. I'm not a Bible student. So if I get something a little long, but there's some good questions which has some valid things. As he talked about how Jesus is described as a tekton in the Hebrew, which is a builder, right? And then in Western culture, we associate builders as being a carpenter. But he made a very compelling case that Jesus was probably a stonemason, because we're walking around Nazareth around there, and there's no trees. I mean, we're in Israel. This is limestone and rocks everywhere. So I don't think we saw a wooden building the entire time we were there. Everything in Israel is made out of rocks. And there's 3 types of limestone that makes up different things. They use limestone for everything. And so this here was in the quarries. Everywhere around Nazareth was limestone quarries. And so he kind of, again, talked to the guys, coaching them along, saying, Jesus wasn't some little scrawny guy. He was probably a stonemason. And his lesson for that space was get chiseled. Get in there, study the Word. Jesus was tough, and he knew his Scripture. So get chiseled and allow yourself to be shaped into something that's usable by the Lord. And so those are the lessons we took out of this place. And it was a neat concept to think of maybe Jesus in a slightly different way than what I had thought of before. I don't know if you can see on my watch, we're in Jericho right here, and this is proof. This here is 4 in the afternoon. It's 108 degrees. You can see my little heat sensor there, so just know we're joking. It was hot. Right here, this is in Bethlehem, and so he called it the Christmas cave. And again, everything is, this is history, so he would always be very careful to say, we don't know a lot, but we certainly think things. So he said, we really think that this may be the type of space where Jesus was actually born, because we hear about the stable and the different things, but it's like in the culture, it's actually very common to have babies in a cave outside of the village. When you understand that, of course, if you've been studying the Bible, you know that once you have a baby, you're unclean, so you have to be outside of your culture. They don't want those babies to then be born in a house, because culturally there's an insula, so the whole family lives in one little tiny house, multi-generations. So oftentimes it would be common to then move out into a cave in here and actually have the baby out here to keep the house clean and things like that. And so he was like, there's a chance that this is the cave that Jesus could have been born in, because we're in Bethlehem. We have a great cave with where it could be. And so he called this the Christmas cave and showed us how that would work. And he did show us that the manger probably, we always think of Jesus in this little hay trough, but that's probably not what it was. It was probably actually a stone little water cistern, because in their culture, you don't ever bring hay to the animals. The animals all go to where the food is, because it's not extra, so they don't just chop hay and have hay laying around anywhere. They forage and they wander to get the hay. What they bring to the animals is water, because that's what they need. So it was probably more of a water trough that Jesus was laid in, not a hay area. So, well, we're moving fast. I'm going to try to keep going here, guys. So we then moved up to the Galilee, and I'll kind of show you. So now we moved out of the West Bank. We pushed all the way north. There's Galilee, and actually Tiberias right here. I know it's really tiny, but that's where the city we actually stayed in. And then we moved all up into the Golan Heights and down as we kind of looked at different areas. And this was fascinating, because this is where the New Testament came to life for us, because we kind of worked through the history, but now this is where Jesus spent 80% of his ministry. And John pointed out, why would Jesus spend so much of his time in one space? And he said, because this is where the Jews who are really seeking their faith and seeking to be righteous, this is where most of them lived actually at this time. And so he says, God calls us. He sits at the door and knocks, and he's interested in people that are really seeking him. And yes, we go and we share, but these are the people that were going to be open to his message as it came through. So he was spending his time up in that mostly right here in the northwest area is where Jesus spent 80% of his ministry. That's where all the disciples came from. Well, most of the disciples all came from that area, and that's where we have Capernaum, where he lived and shared his ministry. Very intentionally, because you see, this is Capernaum right here, the largest synagogue in Israel. This is one of the synagogues that was there, and it's very intentional because Capernaum was right on the Via Maris, which was the major road that linked Damascus to Caesarea to Tyre, then down to Egypt. So that was a major thoroughfare. So again, he's doing his ministry. People are coming to him to see him right here at these places. He's putting himself in a very intentional space to transfer the word. But this is us at the Jordan River. You guys can think, I always picture the Jordan River as being bigger, and we're sitting there in this fairly small trickle. I mean, it's as wide as this one little section right here at moments. And then John shared with us, this is not the way the Jordan River always looks. So the Jordan River is actually one of the fastest flowing rivers in the world, because during the rainy season, when we get all this rain over 3 months, it starts way up in the northern area at Mount Hermon, which is almost 9,000 plus feet high, and then drops to the Sea of Galilee, which is negative 850 feet below sea level, over 12 miles. So this is a major drop. And so when this rain comes, it floods, and the Jordan River can get up to a half mile wide and 150 feet deep, okay, at times and moments. And so depending on when the Israelites are crossing or when you're there, it can look very, very different than what we were. And obviously, this was a neat spot. We had a lot of the guys dedicate their lives to the Lord and do some different things in that space. And he talked about putting both feet in, getting your feet wet and being all in to what you're trying to do. Mount Arbel, this was right outside Tiberias. And so we actually just outside of our hotel, we could hike up the side of this mountain. This was the highest mountain in the Galilee area. And this is actually where the Great Commission happened. So we stood on top of this mountain, and the Great Commission, when you're standing up there, it's the highest mountain in the area. As you look around, he explained how this was an opportunity to show you how to serve, because up here, again, it's going to be really small, but in the northern area where we were was the religious triangle. So this is where you had people that were seeking Christ. But then if you pushed off to the east, you have Gamla. So this is Gamla right here. And this is where Judas the Maccabees and all the zealots were. I was going to say, if I put a fortress somewhere, this is where it would be. This is the fortress that sustained like thousands and thousands of Romans that would come in. And it's just this huge gully with this tooth coming up is almost impenetrable. But that's where the zealots were. And so they were fighting in their own way. They were killing Romans, and they caused the Romans to eventually wipe out Jerusalem. Part of the uprising here did that. But then as you go down around, you had the pagan area. So this is all different gods that were believing in other faiths. And so that was what they needed to be served. And then in Tiberias, where we were, would have been the Herodians, which was just people that were secular, and they believed that wealth, and they were okay just with where they at. They weren't depending on gods to do anything. So then we got to Jerusalem, and then Jerusalem was incredible. I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to go really quick. But this is where our hotel was. This is the Temple Mount, and we spent a lot of time. We played our basketball games right up here in the Christian quarter, right there, and then down over here. This here would be the old city, which was David's city, which was incredibly small. I mean, it really changed my view of obviously how many people were actually around at that time, and how big it was, and how influential this place was, because it was a small area that we went through, but they had the layers dug down so we could see, David's time and Hezekiah's time and Nehemiah's time. You could see all the history just stacked up, and that's it just amazed me that literally it's like just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of civilization over time, doing different things. So, the Temple Mount was again another area where we were really shown at how different and how separate the people groups were with the different religions. Obviously, it's one of the most fought over places in the world, but we had to stand these long lines, because now it's reversed, right? When we were out in the countryside, as a Palestinians trying to get into Israel was really difficult. Here on the Temple Mount, it was the Hebrews, the Israelites trying to get up onto the Temple Mount. They only open it for 2 hours, like twice a day. So there's very limited access and very specific times. You had to wait in lines and go through metal detectors and the whole 9 yards to get, if you weren't Muslim. If you're Muslim, it's just open. We walked through the Muslim quarter, and you could just walk right up onto the Temple Mount or walk right off of it, no problem. Just huge open doorways. But from the Jewish quarter, you had to sit there and wait in these long lines and to get up in there, and you had to be off at a certain time. So it was really interesting. And they wouldn't let you take anything on there, because because the Jews want to have the Torah, they want to read and they want to teach up there, and Muslims don't want them to do that, right? So they would check and make sure. He's like, you can't bring any books, we can't bring any papers, we can't do anything. And even when we were there, we'd walk around and he would tell us, John would be like, if I start talking about the weather, just realize that's because there's somebody coming by to check on what we're talking about, and we're not allowed to teach up here. So he would literally be sharing a story about the influence of this in Scripture, and then suddenly he'd be like, well, you guys, I hope you're having a good day, and it's been fun walking around with you guys, and then he'd be like, all right, back to it, and then you'd go back in there, because it would be, but this space is huge. This is, I can't remember how many football fields. It is a massive, massive structure up in here, so it's pretty neat. So I really want you guys to have, I want to go back in here. So Jerusalem is this little, in the Pac-Man right here, it's right in the mouth. That's Jerusalem right there. Yeah. Yeah, we're running out of time. Should we just pause and wait for questions? Anything else? I'll flip through some slides, but there's still some other places to go. But that was the 4 main areas we were in. We had lots of other things we can kind of pop through on different pieces. I do want to do the unplanned ministry real fast. So obviously we had a plan when we went in and what we were going to do, and God always has other plans from what you have planned. So we had some really unplanned ministry opportunities. Our bus driver was Muslim, which is amazing to me that we're on a biblical tour talking about where Christians run through the Jewish culture on a tour, and our bus driver is Muslim and didn't have a faith at all. And so we engaged him. You can't see him, but that's Musa right there. Our guys were unbelievable with him. Every day, they're just talking to him all the time, engaging him all the time. He'd always be the first one to make sure he went through our meals with us. First of all, was the first guy served. They tried to show him the hospitality that John had explained to us just on their own. And so we had a lot of opportunity. Then over here, we got to go to his father-in-law's house to have a meal there. And so we got to have a traditional meal with the Palestinian family. And it was, you can see here's Michelle holding a little bit. Now there's multi-generations. This is like, in their culture, so there's mom and dad, grandpa and grandma, mom and dad. People get married, they come back and bring there's all the different family groups. There's multiple families all in the same home. And at first we thought, and this is going to be one of the hard lessons for us, it was different. We saw things from a different, I think our westernized American view of Israel, it kind of was shifted a little bit for us while we were there. So this is, his father-in-law owned the bus company that we were on. So we're thinking, this guy he owns a tour company. He's got to be super affluent. We show up at this home, and it's pretty poverty-driven compared to anything that we'd see. And I'm like, this is a pretty major, business owner here. And it's just the economic pressures that Palestinians are under are incredible because of their tax conversions and stuff. There's we can go into a lot more details on some of those things that we learned, again, from our perspective there, but it was really neat, and just playing with our kids, and we played soccer. They had this little tiny patio just the size of maybe this little area, and we just played soccer for hours with them. It was pretty fun. So, but the land's rich. You have to understand culture, word pictures, and most importantly, God has a plan. None of this stuff is by accident. It was so clear to us on how everything was structured that, He knew from the very start, we don't take it by surprise. He knew from the start what was going to take to bring us back to Him when we were going to fail. And so that was very evident. And I just wanted to share for you guys. I was a little nervous going there. I was like, I'm so sure in my faith now. What if I go over there and I'm disappointed? And it kind of rattles me a little bit. It was a legitimate fear that I had going over there. And I'll just share with you, going over there affirmed my faith tremendously. I was, because I'm a science guy. I like history. If there's holes in things and I see it, it makes me concerned. And so I was worried going there some of those holes are going to become apparent to me. And it was the opposite. It affirmed my faith and what I believed so tremendously. So just really thankful for it. So we have some questions real quick. And we'll say thank you. There's the basketball guys, so you don't have to stare at us the whole time. Yeah.
When are you going
back? Anytime I got the chance. I think you could go back 1,000 times and never.
John did say most people want to go back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's true.
Good. Might just release everybody, Mark, whenever we're supposed to. But yeah.
How was the basketball? Yeah.
No, actually, they had some pretty talented players, but on the Palestinian side, it was really pretty weak. The Israeli basketball teams are actually very, very good, and they have a really strong international presence. But their season ended, the professional leagues, right the week before we got there, and so we focused on Palestine. And that was easier for us anyway because John had been the head coach for the national Palestinian side, so he had all kinds of connections with Palestinian basketball, and it was good. Our guys couldn't have handled super competitive basketball after what they were doing the whole time, so it worked out perfect. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
If I
There a couple. I mean, they had a couple guys that they had at least 1 or 2 6'7" guys, and we were in their first division, so they're really good players. They had a couple really good players there, but they just didn't have depth. So yeah, yeah.
that's going on, Harold. That you can talk about. First they stay in Israel. Why take this? Because I know a lot of it is that Israel has so much money. And like the guy that did not have it for area, and it kind of took my another discussion. What
Was it?
Which did you get to see?
Yeah, and I'll share. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not a political expert, so I'd be very careful what I share my impressions on there. And we can talk about this. This would be a great thing to just chat about afterwards for a long time. But yeah, it's different. That was our experience. Was there's wrong on both sides. It's sometimes I think we get taught that Palestinians are all bad and they're all terrorists. And that's not the case. There's far more Christians in the Palestinian sector than there are in the Israeli sector. They're much more open to the gospel because their history is different. They're more open to it. So it's just there's wrongs on both sides. It's just I think that's the best way for me to put it that way. And it's really apparent when you get over there that it's a challenge. So good. Well, we just want to say thank you so much. I think from both of us, the opportunity to go and to go together. I couldn't imagine having this, and this is just something for couples out there. I couldn't imagine going on a trip like this that impacted me so much and not having her there. I think just be careful on big things, missing it together, because together it was incredibly joining and valuable, and then to share and debrief and have accountability on actually following through on some of the lessons and commitments we made over there was really big. I think it'd almost be a little bit separating if I had suddenly made this big jump from being over there in my faith and Michelle was still back here, with her head in the grind with all the kids the whole time and not going there with me. So just something to think about as you do ministry together is trying to partner when you can, because it can be a huge growth and it's much better together than it is by yourself. So, but thanks, guys.